Hi, and welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today on the show, Erin Holmes is here. She has a compelling story to talk about and some information that starts at the beginning of where this trans movement generates and comes from. We'll be back with more right after these. In this age of gender confusion, it's difficult to find advice you can trust to help protect your child from those who would seek to unduly influence them, setting them up to be manipulated and exploited. On Unmasking the Trans Movement, we discuss, educate, and deliver the info parents want and need to help their children, grandchildren, and even themselves. Each week, we connect you with the clinical professionals and subject matter experts who understand what this movement is all about and how to navigate around this disturbing mental health issue. Join UnmaskingTheTransMovement.com for our next webinar, where John Euler, Dr. Ann Gillies, and our clinical experts provide the advice you can trust to help protect your child from those who would seek to unduly influence them and set them up to be manipulated and exploited within the trans movement. Our webinars provide access to supporting groups discussing the issues you want to talk about with other parents and experts alike. Learn to understand how the language has changed, stay up to date on this new lingo, and be able to have a rational, understanding conversation with your child who might be getting dragged into, sorry for the pun, this evil trans agenda. Our mission is clear: to unmask the deception and protect the most vulnerable among us. For webinar dates, times, and pricing, please visit our website at unmaskingthetransmovement.com/webinars. Welcome back. Today on the show, Erin Holmes is stopping in to sit down with none other than John Euler and Dr. Ann Gillies. They have lots to discuss. We're going to start today's show off, I believe, with the DSM-5. And if you don't know who that is or what that's all about, well, I've brought the experts in today to bring it all together for you. John Euler is with me. John, everybody is wondering how this trans movement began, how it's developed, and I guess that's part of what we're going to talk on here today.
Brad, this is going to be an intensive discussion with an expert in terms of, when we think of the trans movement, you have to think of both the big picture or at the macro level, the 38,000 foot view, and then getting down to the local or granular level, the micro level. We have somebody who has done a deep dive into connecting dots that will go all the way up to the macro level. There's a number of dark special interests, as I call them, that have been pushing this grand scheme. This is the greatest man-made ruse, scam, and scheme ever foisted upon vulnerable youth and their families, leaving them susceptible to, because of the undue influence in the targeting, for financial predators. We have seen that. These are the kids that have skin in the game. So they're ending up with body parts being sliced off, and sexual predators. We have now someone that can help us connect the dots into a serious part of this whole entire scam, which is allowing sexual predators to not only gain access to these kids, but eventually their goal is the normalization, the destigmatization, and the legalization of pedophilia. And that is why I'm so excited to have not just Dr. Ann Gillies join us as my co-host from Canada, because a lot of this is coming out of Canada and California, but Erin Holmes, who is doing a deep dive and has uncovered some very important information that parents and other good people need to be aware of. So Ann, thank you for being here, and you are as concerned as I am and about the push to normalize and legalize pedophilia.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this interview with you, Erin. This is the first time I've met you. I just got to talk to you a bit behind the scenes. We're going to, as Don said, do a deep dive into the DSM, dubbed the Psychological Bible, to Prostasia Foundation. We're going to talk about some Canadian therapists who have been pushing for decades, actually, this whole issue of pedophilia being decriminalized. I'll use that word. So Erin, Without further ado, let's start with the DSM, and you take it away because you have tons of information. So we'll probably put in a question or two here, but other than that, I think you just go ahead and share.
Sure, thank you. I've listened to your interviews, and one of the things that struck me was you mentioned how special interests have captured clinical guidelines and how gender clinics became popular around 2013, and you saw the same effect happening globally. And the tipping point you mentioned can be traced back to the publishing of the DSM-5, where these changes sort of started to shift focus and opened up the criteria to children and ultimately adolescent gender dysphoria, as I've heard John refer to. So suddenly, this all becomes very lucrative and profitable, and it starts to override the boundaries of, as he puts it, very emotionally wounded children who are easily manipulated. And you go on to say that without these DSM changes, the trans movement would kind of just fade away back into 2005 numbers where it was virtually non-existent. So that stuck with me. But what especially struck me was the mention of Ray Blanchard and others, and you sort of hear like the same names over and over and over again. And that intersects with some of my work. It struck me because I've written about Blanchard and his colleagues, James Cantor and Michael Sato. I believe you mentioned they were from Canada, and they're all also prominently at the front of the movement to normalize pedophilia. Cantor openly advocates that pedophilia is a sexual orientation that belongs within the LGBT movement. He and Ray Blanchard have written a paper for, I think it was published in NIH, that alleges that pedophiles are born, not made. And another interesting fact is Blanchard wrote the criteria for paraphilia in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, where he tried to change its classification to make it
Erin,
seem
we
like
have on the
it was
screen
a
right now, we have a
sexual
picture of
orientation.
James Cantor. So
Yeah.
he's best known for one that, quite frankly, is trying to destigmatize pedophilia. He's pushed the term MAPS, minor attracted persons, which is a misnomer, and he tries to make the case based upon his favorite phrase is the science is settled. No, the science is not settled. Taking a screenshot of somebody's brain, you have no idea why it is the way it is, and it strangely looks like a man's brain who is saturated in porn for years, quite frankly. So he tries to make the case that pedophilia should be a sexual orientation and should be pedophiles should be sent to treatment. Oh, interesting. He owns a he heads up a treatment program. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. He heads up a treatment program and he sits on multiple boards for, organizations who really like, academics who see pedophilia as like a scale of multidimensional sexual interest. And I don't think a lot of people realize just how successful they are, that they were able to actually change a classification in the DSM. However, it resulted in a statement by the APA maintaining its position that pedophilia is a mental disorder. But this statement wasn't made until they had a lot of conservative pushback from people in the psychology community. Their peers ultimately challenged what was written. And if they hadn't, it probably would not have been pulled. It would have enabled significant advancement in the belief that pedophilia is a sexual orientation, which is false.
Okay, so this guy's, wait a minute. Okay, so this guy's pushing this, but let me ask you something. Does he practice what he preaches?
Well, he would never acknowledge that. Of course, no one would. But the P in this stands for pedophile.
That's right, and I understand that. But I'm wondering if he practices what he preaches, and if he does, how does a guy like this be able to live in society? Because a guy like this in jail wouldn't last a day.
No, he would not say that he practices this, but he works with men that do. And one thing that should be known about him is that he believes that a therapist should not be a mandated reporter when it comes to men disclosing that they are accessing child pornography during a session. His rationale is, well, if pedophiles don't have a safe place, then how are they going to get help if they can't disclose? I work with sex offenders and men that are deeply steeped in porn, and that is a ruse. My contention, by the way, is when a man goes to somebody like Cantor, it's for an insurance policy. In the event he finally gets busted, then Cantor or the therapist can write a note or stand on the stand on his behalf and try to get the guy diverted to treatment. But more than that, and as Erin is describing, this is about shifting public sentiment and then eventually getting policies and legislation laws changed.
That's right. And back to what you were saying, Erin, about the DSM and the push to actually have pedophilia taken out of the DSM as a mental illness. And that was stayed, but we know that the next DSM that comes out may be totally different, and it may be, it may in all likelihood be removed. So that is a dangerous precipice that we are on. So yeah, go ahead.
Right. And this is why we should all be concerned, because this is what's coming to a neighborhood near you.
Yeah, love knows no boundaries. Isn't that interesting? This is the whole love is love group. That statement has always just sat right about here with me, because all love is not equal. What is called love is grooming in these.
That's right. And Erin, so now we've, I think, hopefully engaged the audience to understand this is serious. You notice these men, these are both men, by the way, and the unicorn is the primary pedophile symbol. The question is, why were these men, the guy on the right, by the way, was on RuPaul's Drag Race. And these little boys that are dressed up as girls, as mandated reporters, right? This would require a mandated report, but what's happened is everything has been dumbed down. So what you're talking about, I'll stop sharing here. What you're talking about is already happening, that mandated reporters and others who are responsible for the protection of children are being influenced by the likes of Cantor and the others that you were mentioning. Go ahead and mention the names again, and then keep talking. We have a lot to cover.
Well, this is Sato, who is a colleague of James Cantor, right? There's James Cantor, Michael Sato, and Ray Blanchard are three major ones. And Sato writes that pedophilia in males, he believes, can be parsed down to an identity label. And they write in prestigious journals. And he says, that pedophilia in males can be parsed down to an identity label in the same way homosexuality has been parsed down to identity labels like queer and gay. I'm quoting him. He argues that viewing pedophilia as a sexual orientation, he thinks, will prevent child abuse, and that removing the stigma of pedophilia will encourage those who want to offend to seek treatment for regulation, is their belief. Except self-regulation in these circles, the methods for pro-pedophilia advocates relies heavily on peer-to-peer support groups instead of traditional treatments, because these pedophiles are typically not interested in traditional treatment methodologies. They should be, but if they or society views pedophilia as a sexual orientation, then there's really no illness for them to overcome. And when I see the photos that you're showing now, the first thing I think of is, okay, well, this is predators need and seek societal consent. And this is one of the reasons why they spend so much time online. They document their activities. They write about how they feel about it. The journalists indulge them. They communicate openly in chat rooms with each other. They do this in favor of seeking treatment a lot of times because this is like the new thing to do, to join a peer-to-peer support group where their feelings will be validated.
And like we're supposed to trust that, I do sex offender treatment, and that, it's amazing to think that somebody's going to pull the wool over the public's eyes to say, oh, peer-to-peer support. I want to bring up now, you've mentioned Michael Sato. You provided us with this article to help us see these folks, these gentlemen are serious about influencing public policy and perspective and perception and eventually laws.
Yes. And, from what they've done, they've supported a lot of like non-traditional methods that, pedophiles are using instead of seeking treatment, like MAP Support Club is a big one. And the use of the term MAP, as you said, minor attracted person, is not, accurate. It probably really should be like minor rape attracted.
That's right.
But it in itself, it risks the path to normalization of sexual attraction to children as a sexual orientation. These pro-pedophilia clubs sell themselves as global intervention initiatives. They sell themselves as safe spaces for pedophiles to self-regulate in times of trouble, as they say. And they self-police in their commitment to never harm a child. But
You
a
like
few
that?
years ago,
Wait,
it turned out,
self-police, right? People need to understand what that means. It's, no, I promise I'm going to be good, and I'll make sure Joe is good too. We both are promising. I promise. Self-policing.
right? But there's no policing in the mind of a pedophile. And
No,
as it
that's right.
turned out a few years ago, one of them was busy actively raping a child. One of them in this room. But these communities, they enable pedophiles and offenders to build camaraderie in chat rooms that include children as young as 13 years of age.
That's really, really frightening. And another thing that this group seems to continually be pounding on society is that society as a whole are really to blame if pedophiles or MAPs act on their persuasions. That it's because of stigmatization. We've heard all that before, haven't we? And the fact that they aren't being recognized for who they are. That this is, again, we hear this motto kind of born like this. You've heard that before. We've heard that for decades, and now it's being attributed to these young people and men. What I want to ask you, Erin, what do you see as or how do you see this impacting children in the future? I think we all know the answer, but I want to hear you.
Sure. I think that the proposal that normalizing pedophilia will prevent child sexual abuse is based on falsehood. And as a society, it's important to be explicit about boundaries, to strengthen truths and to marginalize these falsehoods. Otherwise, we become collaborators in this manipulation. And the pro-pedophilia movement will say, they want this movement to go just up until one point and no further. But this is not how movements work. They know this. They know that if they're granted civil rights as pedophiles, they'll be able to take it all the way.
And Erin, right. I want to, if I might, I want to share some of your work so people can begin to understand that you're not just saying certain things. You have done your homework. So let's start with tell us what we're looking at here.
Sure. So this is Project Raven, and this is, I think this is actually how you and I met.
I believe so.
And Project Raven is the project co-founded by Dr. Alaric Nod, who's done a great work mapping pro-pedophilia organizations.
And the organization,
this project tracks and compiles data.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but people can see up at the search bar, the publicinsight.org. And as you're talking, I'm going to scroll down. You all have done a tremendous job in connecting dots.
Yeah, this project tracks organizations and people who promote pedophilia or child abuse narratives, especially in academia.
And we're going to, we see it all comes down to where it kind of focuses on an organization we're going to talk about in probably the second half. If you're willing to stick around, there's so much to discuss because people need to understand that there are very real and serious efforts spearheaded by so-called academics and researchers that are, I'm going to just say it like this, they are hell-bent in eventually legalizing pedophilia, and they'll do it in a backdoor way, and they've been doing it. So it's decriminalizing, destigmatizing, they've got all sorts of names, but little by little, they will not stop. They have become white-collar psychopaths, and they hunger and thirst after defiling and defrauding children. And this is their mission. So our mission, with your help, Erin, is to help expose them for who they are so that we can stop them in their tracks from getting legislation passed, lowering age of consent. This concept of bodily autonomy is, they're coming at this every which way.
Erin, I want to quickly jump in again and just ask another question. What are you recommending for help with regards to parents and grandparents as you see this unfolding and you've done so much research? If you had to say something to a parent or grandparent right now, how can they get involved and what steps can they start to take to get active?
Mm-hmm. Well, I in order to get active, it's really important to be proactive, starting from home. And that's with mobile devices because it's just a portal straight, to the child. And even Apple by default takes down all of the parental, settings at age 13, which is an age that, these guys like you can enter these MAP support rooms at age 13. They enable that, and it's not illegal. I think the best thing that a parent can do is to learn how to lock down phones efficiently, to block social media at the router. I don't think children should use social media at all. And, to write your local congressman about bills and laws that are on the table to protect children online, and even to raise that age where, they recognize at the age of 13, basically, children are just unleashed on the internet just about anywhere. And I know that there are several congressmen proposing that they raise that age to 16.
That's all? Just 16?
Right. That's what I thought too, but it's a start. It's a start. A lot of people, they allow their children to use social media at a very young age. And I think that that's the most detrimental thing, just for parents to not give in when their children ask if they can open a Snapchat account or Facebook or Instagram. Just say no, no matter the age.
This is a huge issue when you're talking about children and social media and the whole issue of age of consent, because that has been lowered and lowered and lowered for sexual consent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in Canada, the age of consent is 16, which is too low when you consider some of the other legislation and consider that, even a 15-year-old who is involved with a 20-year-old, the 20-year-old cannot be, unless the child claims it's rape, the 20-year-old can't be prosecuted. And, this is craziness, but it's all part of this whole pedophilic agenda that's going on.
Right. Erin, describe what we're seeing here. Now, this is excellent. Here we go. MAPS, minor attracted persons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're looking at the MAP Support Club here. And MAP Support Club is basically children as young as 13 and pedophiles who come together online in a closed chat room and discuss, how they feel, discuss pedophilia as a sexual orientation. I do not believe that this is, well, I mean, for lack of a better word, I think it's kind of deranged to say that this could have any sort of therapeutic effect.
That's right.
Putting pedophiles and children together. I think it's just absurd.
Are there any therapists involved in this, or is this something that's just created by some LGBTQ person?
Oh, well, you have Prostatia Foundation, who is a pro-pedophilia org that lobbies for the rights of the pedophile. James Cantor was on their board of advisors
And they
for a
pushed
very
this.
long time.
Did the slide come up about before you act?
Mm-hmm.
Erin, sorry, did the slide come up about before you act?
Mm-hmm.
Is that on the screen?
I see it now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, there you go. This is a group that's trying to legitimize. You can see they're putting out material. It looks very official, but this is again a group dedicated to the normalization and legitimization of the concept of minor attracted persons. That is a misnomer. That is a distortion of reality. These are men that are accessing. This is one thing they'll never talk about. Right? How much pornography these men have consumed and what they actively are consuming online, because nobody's checking. And me as a sex offender treatment provider, how many times do I have parole agents say that, oh, Mr. So-and-so isn't coming to your group anymore? I said, really? Well, he's doing so well. Now, because I worked in prison with these sex offenders, I have a hunch already. The best acting sex offender tends to be the most deviant because they know how to do impression management. And the parole agents, I just had one 2 weeks ago, right? That he's done, he's failed out, he's going back to prison. Why? Oh, he had a second phone. Oh yeah, he's got all sorts of child porn on it. So I think about the access I have as a sex offender treatment provider in the community through parole agents. How much information do I have? I have a lot more information available than a James Cantor seeing a guy in an office. And I can tell you what, these are the world's greatest liars. So we're going to trust them with peer-to-peer support.
I think we need to take apart the word virtuous pedophiles. Erin, tell me about that. This is kind of how they display themselves, as virtuous.
Oh yeah, the virtuous pedophiles. They use all sorts of symbolisms, and I hardly ever like to really listen to what they say, and I like to look at the outcomes of what they do. But with the virtuous pedophiles, it's a symbolism. Virtuous is, you're like, well, that's something good. They must be good, right? And I mean, it's the same with Prostatia Foundation. The name itself means protection. And it's like, well, they must be good, right? And, the Prostatia Foundation CEO, or I think he has stepped down, maybe manages it from the outside, but the founder used the name Terminus. Jeremy Malcolm uses the name Terminus in chat rooms, which is also symbolic. It means basically the background is there's a temple, and there are these basically boundaries, and they put up offerings delivered to this stone. I mean, the symbolism is just so ironic and strange. And they use all this Greek symbolism, but I said once in one of my articles, they should have considered how when the Thales of Miletus writings, when asked if you could hide evil from the gods, he said not even in his thoughts. So I just don't believe that you can really listen to what they're saying. You have to look at what they're doing. Prostatia signed up as a nonprofit in the state of California, a public benefit charity. In its first years, and still it consisted of a team of kink enthusiasts, sex workers, and multiple convicted child sex offenders. And they were founded in response to FOSTA SESTA, which was legislation aimed at protecting children from online sex trafficking, except they viewed the legislation as a threat to pornographic interests and lobbied against it on the grounds that it violated free speech.
And there's so much. We've just begun to peel back the layers of this very dark underworld. For those that are trying to push the myth of MAPS, minor attracted persons, how does that connect to the trans movement? Without pornography and the DSM-5, my contention is the entire movement would dry up and blow back away, back to the numbers we saw in 2005, which is non-existent. So would you be willing to stay with us? We're going to do part 2. And
Sure.
For Dr. Gillies, Dr. Gillies, this whole thing is so deviant and infuriating for those of us that professionally deal with trauma survivors and try to protect kids.
Absolutely, and it's very personal for me as well. So yeah, I really appreciate you, Erin, and the just the courage that you have for speaking out on this. Thank you so much for being with us.
Brad,
Thank you.
We'll pick it up at this point at the beginning of the next part.
I'm not sure how to feel right at the moment. I'm tossed between anger and disappointment, disbelief. It's all part of unmasking the trans movement. You are going to feel a lot of emotions along the way as parents, as grandparents, and kids. Get used to it. Get used to it. It's a roller coaster. Grandma always said she loved the roller coaster. Why? She loved the ups and downs. And that's exactly what we're going through with unmasking this trans movement. There are lots of ups and downs. For John Euler, Dr. Ann Gillies, and of course our wonderful guest today, Erin Holmes, I'm Brad Wilder. We'll see you next time on Unmasking the Trans Movement.